Good evening and welcome to the September 17th edition of the Driskell Debrief. Thank you for tuning in. I hope that all is well with you. I so treasure this time together every week where we get to check in with one another. I can let you know what I've been up to. And I love it when you get busy in the chat. I want to hear, how is life? What are you thinking? How are you feeling? We are fewer than 50 days out from the presidential election. Well, it's not just a presidential election, right? Just say we're more than, or a little under 50 days out from the election. And there's so much that's at stake. Yes, in the presidential, it feels like our very democracy is at stake. It feels like the rule of law is at stake. There's so much at issue in this election. And of course, we know that we also have down ballot races in Florida. We have a U.S. Senate race that I hope you all are paying attention to. The Democratic nominee is Debbie Merkel-Powell. And then it goes down ballot from there for some important congressional races. Of course, we have our state house races where we are working so hard to break the Republican supermajority. And let me tell you, that would mean such positive things for state legislative government in Florida. Because Democrats are in the super minority, what that means is that the majority party Republicans have more than 2/3. That means they can waive the rules at any time. That means they don't have to consult us whenever they want to do something legislatively. But I want you to know that under my leadership, the Florida House Democratic Campaign Committee has a competent plan to break the Republican supermajority. And we've just got some amazing members and some wonderful people on our team who are working so hard to bring this to bear and to make it a reality for us out there in Florida. We've got local races. I mean, there's so much going on. And if you didn't know, today is National Voter Registration Day. So we are going to have a wonderful conversation about voter engagement. But before we get to that, I thought it'd be good to let you know a little bit about what we've been up to. So a couple things that I want to highlight. Let's start with the fact that many of you know that in House District 67, I represent the Tampa campus of the University of South Florida. Go Bulls. I'm honored to tell you that my legislative staffers are both graduates of the University of South Florida. They're phenomenal, Zach and Chelsea. In fact, my campaign manager, Kat, what's up, Kat, is a graduate of USF as well. And USF was recently in the news with some very, very good news, which is that 13 students were selected for the 2024 Millennium Fellowship from the University of South Florida. This is an incredible opportunity. These students will get to actually work with a committee at the United Nations to problem solve on issues that have global social impact. And it's my understanding, I believe, that USF has the most, or it's a university with one of the most students selected to participate in this very prestigious program this year. So a big shout out to the Bulls who are doing phenomenal things. And I'm so very proud of them. And we're so glad for those 13 students. We've reached out to them to congratulate them individually and one by one. Something else we've been up to is that we marked, it's so hard to believe it, but we marked 23 years since September 11th last week. And my staff and I were able to attend a couple of events in the community. One was held by, it was a beautiful memorial at the Tampa Firefighters Museum downtown. It was held by the Tampa Police Department in conjunction with the Tampa Fire Department. And they do this every year. And I'm always so very moved. It's not a particularly long program, but it's just the impact of the program, where we honor our first responders. We remember the lives who were lost that day. We remember the first responders who rushed into danger and then passed away later from complications from being at the World Trade Center site that day. And for me, it was an opportunity to reflect on where I was on the morning of September 11th. So the summer leading up to September 11th, I was in New York. I spent a summer in New York doing an internship just before I started law school. And I lived in Brooklyn, actually, and I would commute to Manhattan every day, and I would pass under the World Trade Center. And I can remember at the end of that summer in August, I thought, man, I should go up to the top of the towers because I've never been. But I thought, oh no, like I remember on move day, I thought that. And then I said, no, I'll be back in the city in a couple of weeks and I'll just wait until then. And then I left New York and moved down to DC for law school, where I was at Georgetown in my law school career. And I remember that morning, someone knocked on the door. They were looking for my roommate. And I was like, oh, she's in class. And he told me that the towers had been hit and that one of them had fallen. And I turned on the TV and I watched in horror, just as the entire world did, one of the greatest acts of terror that has been committed on American soil. It was a very scary day. It was a very scary day. Being in DC, the Pentagon had been hit as well. I just felt like there was so much confusion. Folks really didn't understand what was going on. The school was on lockdown. A lot of us wound up gathering in the lower level of the student center, like the basement. My cell phone, actually, it was my first cell phone. You have to remember, it was back in 2001, guys. And I'd gotten my first cell phone out of college, and it had a New York area code because that's where I spent the summer. And then my landline was a DC area code because I was in law school at Georgetown, and my parents couldn't get to me. I couldn't make a call out to my family. Everything was so very scary. And even though that was a very scary day for my classmates and me, I can only imagine how much more terrifying it was for the families who lost loved ones, whether at the Twin Towers, whether at the Pentagon, or whether at the flight that crashed into the ground. It was just a really scary day. And just really, it was very beautiful last week to take some time to remember. I think it's important for cultures to have memorials and to remember the traumatizing things that we go through, so that we can remind ourselves of why it's important to do the things that we do now to carry us into a better future. I'm reminded of all the Islamophobia that happened at that time and how we had to try to find our way past that as a nation. Still have work to do. But man, it was just such a scary time. We then went to a second event, which was held by Mission Barbecue. Mission Barbecue does a tremendous job in our community of uplifting first responders as well as veterans. It was a wonderful event that we went to. And I think what I love about the 9/11 memorial events is that it's not about red or blue. It's not about Republican or Democrat. You have people there of all different political affiliations. It's about being Americans. And I remember there was a French publication, I think, that right after 9/11 published, the day we were all Americans, right? It was like the world was rallying around to our cause. But I think particularly in our country, it's beautiful to come together in those moments where we can set aside the partisanship and just focus on being one big American family. And that's what 9/11 always symbolizes to me, in addition to honoring the lives that were lost and the bravery of our first responders who rushed into danger, many of whom would suffer their own tragedies in terms of giving their lives and making the ultimate sacrifice to try to keep all of us safe. And then I'm so sorry to begin with such somber news, but it's really important. Many of you maybe heard the news today that came out about the Georgia mom who died back in 2022 after being denied care when she sought an abortion. And my team told me this story in the middle of the day today, and I had many more meetings to get through. So I'll be honest with you, I had to compartmentalize just so I could make it through the day. And then when I got a little time this evening to process, it brought me nearly to tears. This was a single mom who already had a son who had to leave Georgia to seek abortion care in North Carolina because Georgia had a 6-week ban in place. Keep in mind, Florida has a 6-week ban in place right now. So she went to another state to get the abortion care that she needed. And this woman was a medical assistant, okay? So she understands the healthcare system. I believe she understood what was happening to her body when she came home and she was experiencing so much pain. But the doctors in Georgia refused to treat her for 20 hours or so because they were so afraid of getting in trouble because of the 6-week abortion ban that had been in place. And she was experiencing these complications just shortly after 6 weeks. And her final words were, "Please take care of my son." She knew she was dying. And I read Vice President Harris's statement on this today, and I was incredibly moved and just, I think, felt some sense of comfort that we have a candidate for president on the Democratic side who really is trying to be a candidate for all Americans, though, and for all patients who are suffering at the hands of these barbaric abortion bans. And we've always known that women are suffering under these bans, but this is, from my understanding, the first confirmed case and very visible case where the cause of death was ruled to be it's because she wasn't able to get the care that she needed after seeking an abortion. And my thought, I mean, my God, it is not right in 2024 in the United States of America for any person to be less free just depending on what state they're in at the time. That is not okay. It is not okay for women to be less free in Florida, for patients to be less free in Georgia than they would be in New York or Maryland or wherever it was or wherever it might be that they have to seek abortion care. Again, this is the United States of America, and we need a better way forward. We need to turn the page on these Trump abortion bans because it is costing women's lives. And now I think about her son. That's really who I'm thinking about, who's now without his mom because of some red meat that some politician wanted to throw to their base, thinking that they know better than a patient does for her own family. So if you feel like I do, and you feel incensed, you feel angry, you feel hurt, you feel like this is traumatizing, and you want to see a better future, well, this is where we turn the page to some light and some positivity, because there's something you can do about it, and it's called voting. And remember, I mentioned at the top of our time together that today is National Voter Registration Day. So we thought that it would be fitting. Oh, wait, let me just say a few things in the comments. Dave Coleman, how you doing? Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your comments. Gully, hey, thank you so much for chiming in. We appreciate it. So we wanted today to bring you information about a group that is working so hard out there, fighting for a better future for us all. It's People Power for Florida, and tonight we'll be joined by Juan Ardila, who is the organizing director. So Juan was originally born in Caracas, Venezuela, but he was raised in Broward County, so we get to claim him as Floridian. He is a staunch advocate for voting rights and the empowerment of minority communities. And after registering hundreds of students to vote as a student fellow for Next Gen America as a University of Central Florida student, he worked as a field organizer for the Progressive Turnout Project in 2020 and helped turn out Democrats in 6 crucial swing states. In other words, homeboy is wildly qualified. So now at People Power, Juan leads a field team of student fellows that register students to vote across the state year-round. This is such important work, and we thought it very important for you to know the people who are doing the great work on the ground in Florida. Florida oftentimes gets a bad rap, but we got a lot of good stuff going on. So why don't we bring Juan to the stage so we can have a conversation with him on National Voter Registration Day. Hey, Juan.
Hey, Leader Driskell. Thanks so much for that amazing introduction. And really happy to be here on National Voter Registration Day.
Well, we are so glad to have you, and I feel like we should just go ahead and get to it. Thank you so much for joining. So why don't you start by telling us about People Power for Florida and its mission?
Yeah, definitely. So like you mentioned, we're a year-round voter registration organization, and really with an emphasis on year-round because even on off-year elections, even after November 7th until the end of the semester, we're going to keep registering voters. And so we have a fellowship program where we have student organizers across all major universities in Florida. And so we have students in FSU, UF, USF, right, in Tampa, and also South Florida and Central Florida. And our focus, right, our fellows, we do voter registration every day on college campuses. We partner with community organizations, student organizations, right, that want to engage their peers and get them registered. But as we'll talk about, right, there is some hurdles, right, that groups face. And then so a lot of the focus of our work is kind of bridging those gaps and being that resource for, student organizations, youth focused organizations that, want to register people to vote, want to get them out, but there are just these hurdles. And so we really like to be that resource as well. So yeah, that's a little bit about us.
Well, that's great. Well, can you tell us what your specific role is and what's that like? What's a day in the life like for you?
Yeah, definitely. So as the statewide organizing director, I lead this team of fellows all across the state, right? And so we have goals of voter registration goals for each campus, for the whole state. And so I'm kind of in charge of, right, making sure that our fellows are consistently hitting those goals or engaging with as many students as possible on a daily basis. But then also we do a lot of weekend events and community events. And so it's also a lot about building partnerships with local businesses, with community organizations, and really just moving towards that October 7th deadline at full speed. And yeah, and so after the October 7th, my work's like going to switch a lot to getting out the vote, right? Because as we know, getting people registered is only half of it, right? And so everyone that we've been engaging with on campus the last 4 years, they're going to be getting calls from us. They're going to be getting texts from us, right? We're going to be knocking their doors, right? And we're going to continue, that outreach because we want to get them out to vote now after we got them registered. So that's kind of, my role here and what we're working on.
So let me just say, I love the focus and intention of your organization. I think that young people are the sleeping giant in this country, and that if young people generationally recognize just how much power and influence that they could have if they showed up to vote, like young people could change this electorate in a single election, right? So we know that October 7th is the deadline to register if you want to participate in this election cycle. But then there's also October 24th, which is the registration cutoff for vote by mail. And so we just want to uplift that too, that it's important for people to request their vote by mail ballots. And I can see in the comments that Dave was asking, what's the cutoff date? So October 7th, Dave, is the cutoff for voter registration. And then October 24th is the cutoff to request your vote by mail ballot. But what we always like to say here on our live stream is don't wait. You can request it right now. You don't want to get caught sleeping. You never know what can happen. We live in Florida. There are natural disasters. You never know. So just go ahead and request your ballot right now for VBM. So thank you for that. In the chat, so why is National Voter Registration Day significant for People Power, and what were you all focused on today?
Yeah, and so for us, for me, it always feels like every day is National Voter Registration Day for us. But it's definitely a day where voter registration is not like it's our focus every week, but for every organization, it's like their focus for today. And so we have a lot of folks like that are really interested in joining us, and it's a month, just over a month before the voter registration deadline, and so it's a really good way to engage volunteers as well, because there's a lot of volunteers that aren't familiar with the voter registration process, but when they hear National Voter Registration Day, it feels like they want to join, and we are here to make it easy for them. But so for us, today was really, we had 5 different campuses. We had National Voter Registration Days at campuses and actions. So we had over 10 volunteers on each of these campuses, and we had a big day of action where we had tables, we had food, we had canvassers walking around campus, just focused on getting students registered and updated to vote too, because the big thing is that we want to get students registered to vote on their campus, right? So they might be registered back home. And so a big focus of ours in today was really emphasizing with students, it's National Voter Registration Day. I know you might have registered when you were in high school or when you got your driver's license, but you need to update your registration here because you're not going to be able to vote on campus if you haven't updated. And so that's definitely a big focus for us today. And I also want to plug that was during the day, but in the evening just now, we had a National Voter Registration phone bank. And so this was a phone bank that we put together with a really targeted audience of UCF students that were not registered in Orlando. They're not registered in Orange County. They're still registered either in their home state or in a different county. And so this is a list of students that we've been trying to target in person, right? And now we are focusing on calling them and texting them as well. And so we're doing these phone banks on a weekly basis on Monday nights. But today we launched it on Tuesday because National Voter Registration Day. But Monday nights every week up until October 7th, we are calling UCF students that have not updated their address and getting them updated. And today we were able to make 10,000 calls into UCF students.
10,000 calls in a single day.
Yes, yes, because we have a lot of volunteer excitement. We had volunteers join us from out of Florida as well, because they're excited to help us.
Man, I am so very encouraged by this because, you probably see the headlines just like I do, that Democrats are losing in voter registration advantage. And I know People Power for Florida is a nonpartisan organization. But I guess I just want to suggest that it feels good to me to know that there are organizations out there who care about progressive values, who are spending the time and the energy to register people to vote and inviting them into the conversation about what we want our state to be like going forward. So, speaking of what our state is like, listen, I've been in the legislature for 6 years. So has the founder of People Power, Representative Ana V. Escamani. And I'll tell you that, we've watched, it's the minority party, we have watched the majority just chip away at voting rights. We have watched them make it so much more difficult to register people to vote. So could you speak to that, Juan, like what the changes in the law have been, or really just how it's been impacting People Power and its efforts, and maybe what provisions of the law have been toughest for you as you try to go about this important work?
Yeah, definitely. And I've seen this firsthand, because it's the last 3 years since I've been with People Power. The last two legislative sessions, we've seen more and more restrictions and rules applied to us, and really has really affected our work and has affected the work of a lot of other organizations. And specifically, they increase. So, for example, years ago, you could just print voter registration forms from the website and get your friends, your neighbors registered to vote, right? And that changed about 10 years ago, where Florida added the first layer of restrictions, which is you have to register your organization with the supervisor, with the Division of Elections, and be what they call a third-party voter registration organization. And with that comes, you're responsible for every form. And if you're late on forms, right, or if your form's turned in incorrectly, or if it turns into the wrong supervisor, there's fines attached to that. And for years, those fines were capped at a reasonable amount of $5,000 that you could be fined max for a whole year. And so the first thing that they did was they increased those fines to $50,000, and that's per form, right? So you could get fined up to $100,000 even in some cases, right? And so for a lot of organizations that just are registering people to vote, that 100,000 is 20 times the budget, right, that they have. And so that first piece of legislation really just knocked a lot of third-party voter registrations they totally stopped collecting paper forms. So that is something that really had an effect on us, and really made sure that we just have to follow every single rule, even more stringently. And on top of that, they also added more steps to our voter registration process. So now we have to, every single person that we register to vote, we have to give them a receipt. And so that means that there's an extra step for our volunteers, an extra step for training, right? An extra step for us to mess up, right?
Yep.
And so essentially it's a receipt that we're not even required to keep the receipt for ourselves or send it to the supervisor. It's just we have to get their information, write everything down on a receipt, and give it to them. So it just adds an extra layer, right? An extra roadblock for us and our volunteers. And it's also intimidating, right? Because if I tell a volunteer, right, if you don't give the receipt, it's against the law, right? So then they have an extra guilt on their mind, right? They're like, oh my God, if I mess this up, am I going to jail, right? And so it's a lot of times volunteers are really scared, right, to take that step into voter registration.
And I just kind of want to point out a pattern here, right? Yeah. For doctors to try to perform the duties that they were trained to do when a woman seeks abortion care, go to jail. If it's a situation where protesters are trying to exercise their First Amendment right, but you run afoul of the really draconian anti-protest law that was passed in 2021, you're going to jail. If you try to expand democracy by registering people to vote and, inadvertently, forget to give a receipt or maybe fill it out wrong or turn it into, you're going to jail. You see what I'm getting at? It's like, I see a very clear pattern of the majority attacking behavior by trying to criminalize just basic efforts to expand democracy and to exercise our freedoms and protect our own rights. So it's interesting when you said that bit about the receipt. I saw it pop up in the comments. Somebody put, wow, yeah, wow is right. And this really is the purpose of the live stream, right? Is to try to get information out there, because I'm going to imagine that a lot of our viewers didn't know that they are literally trying to price third-party voter registration organizations out of business with all of these harsh fines and fees. So tell me, are there particular groups, in our society that are more impacted by these bad laws than others?
Yeah, definitely. And so I would say that there are a lot of organizations, or frankly, like just student organizations or smaller groups that aren't necessarily big nonprofits, that led the way on third-party voter registration groups. So this is like a local Democratic Women's Club or local League of Women Voters Club. And something that is true is that if you're it's really grassroots, the third-party voter registration, right? So you're gonna be able to reach your neighbors, your friends, right? And so the people that get affected the most and directly by this, it's actually totally eliminated them, is if you don't have a fundraising structure, a nonprofit like organization structure where you have like enough money in the bank to say, okay, I can take this risk and potentially take on fines, then you're not doing any kind of voter registration. So this went from like hundreds of third-party groups consistently collecting voter registrations on a week-to-week basis in their community to one day to another, just all of them stopping voter registration, and essentially only the organizations that are large enough to, take that risk are the only ones doing it. And to that point, if 2 years ago, third-party voter registration groups registered like 40,000 voters, and this past year they only registered 10,000. Right?
Wow.
And so you see that direct effect.
I feel like wow is going to be a recurring theme in this live stream, Juan. And I'll tell you, I remember when the last iteration of this law was up for debate, the research that I received showed me, or the data that I received indicated that these third-party voter registration organizations are a big way in terms of how minority communities get registered to vote in Florida. And so not only are the laws disproportionately impacting the groups that do these registrations, but I'm concerned that there are folks, particular minority groups in communities who might be disproportionately affected, and therefore their voices might not be heard in our democracy as loudly and clearly as they should be. So, but let's talk about something. I know that People Power for Florida has been working really hard to engage the youth. We've talked a little bit about that. Can you talk about how you've been engaging young people, not just in voting, but the volunteer process? You said that you've got a lot of energy, and maybe you could even uplift, if there's a young person watching and they want to get involved, how do they do that?
Yeah, definitely. And I think our campus presence is our biggest asset. It's our biggest focus, and we have student fellows on 7 different campuses right now. And a lot of the work that we also do is organizing trainings, right? So we did a organizing boot camps, was what we called them, last semester and the year before, where we went to 7 different campuses and hosted day-long organizing trainings with guest speakers that are elected officials and activists in the community, and we had trainings on organizing, on telling your story of self, and we were able to train just over 300 students across 7 different campuses to how to take that first step into political activism, into organizing, right? What does organizing even mean? What does building power on your campus mean, right? And so that's something that we really focused on in the year leading up to 2024, right? To an election year, is really building up campus leaders, right? And showing them how to create more leaders, right? So then in 2024, when we have to knock doors right? When we have to make those calls, when we have to register those last voters, right? That we have that base of student leaders across different organizations, across different campuses, that we've now equipped with those tools, and can now, better organize on campus, right? And so I think that's just been a long-term strategy of ours in the last 2 years, really is like focusing on education and organizing trainings as well. And so that's definitely been, a longer term process, and that goes back to what I said in the beginning of how we really are a year-round organization, right? And we don't just show up on campus in the fall of the election year and try to register everyone to vote, because it's not going to be as effective.
Yeah. Well, we've got a question from Grant in the chat. Hey, Grant, we appreciate that. And the question is, does People Power also let college students know that they can update their address when they vote early in person at any early voting site in their college town?
Yeah, so that's a super great point right there. I think a lot of the conversations we have on campus with students is more about educating them that they didn't know that they had to update, or that they could update, or that they could even vote in Florida if they're from out of state. And so a big thing that we focus on after October 7th, right, is we're still going to be out there after the October 7th voter registration deadline. We're still going to be out there updating students' addresses, because if you're already registered in Florida, you can update your address right at an early voting site, right, or even on the day of the election, right. And so a lot of our outreach after that deadline in October 7th is going to be knocking doors, doing literature drops at dorms and apartment complexes on campus with that information. It's like, hey, you haven't updated your address yet? You could still do it. You could vote on campus. Here's where you go to do it. And so definitely. Oh, I think you're muted.
Okay. Not like I haven't done this like a million times before, right? But thank you, Grant, for the question. Thank you, Juan, for that answer and for sharing that information with our viewers. Let's talk a little bit too. I mean, we've kind of talked about these restrictions, but how is People Power for Florida able to operate in this space, in terms of strategies to address these new restrictions and to ensure voter access? And then if you also have any recent success stories or notable achievements in your efforts to overcome these challenges, we'd love to hear those too. We're a big believer in sharing stories here.
Yeah, definitely. And so it's really just about, so these, as we mentioned, these are hurdles, right? And so we just have to be willing to go over them, right? And really work to keep on going, right? And so we've had to change the way that we onboard our volunteers. We've had to change the way that we train our fellows and then our volunteers as well. And so, for example, you have to be certified to register people to vote with us before you can join. So you'll do a training with one of our organizers beforehand, right? So you can have that base of understanding of, not only what we have to do to make sure we follow all the rules, but like what the seriousness is of following the rules, right? And so just that extra process of like making sure that you have to be trained beforehand also lets them know that this is serious, right? And that we have to make sure we're following all the rules. But then also just empowering a lot of volunteers are just really, and our fellows, they see the news and they're very intimidated by it. But the reality is that it's just one extra step to give the right seat, right? And we on our end are in charge of making sure that they get turned in on time and in the right place. And so we just have to make sure we're on top of it. We have 10 days to turn in the form. I think it used to be we had 14 days, like 2 weeks. So now you have less time to turn in those forms, right? So it's making sure that we keep a record of every form and what days we collect them, so there's no form that's late. And so that's a lot of work on the back end for our team that we have to make sure that we stay on top of. But the way that we think about it, right, is like they put these hurdles, right? We're just gonna jump over them and keep going, because the reason that that they're putting these hurdles is because they're intimidated by the work that we're doing, and they know that it's important.
And see, this is what I always say: we have to out-organize them, right? We can organize our way around any obstacle, over any over any hurdle. I was combining hurdle and obstacle. But the point is that we can be smarter than this, right? Like we can outsmart these these awful laws. Like there's the law that says that you can't give water to a voter. I think it's within 150 feet of the voting place now. Then let's give it to them at 151 feet. Like we
Right.
can totally organize. We don't need to be intimidated. That's the point that I want to make. And that's what I like about the work that you're doing, because it has such positive momentum. And it also just stands up in the face of this intimidation and says, we will not be afraid. We're going to do the work that we have to do. And speaking of intimidation, so when I travel the state and I talk to people, particularly with young voters, I'm hearing a common refrain that they oftentimes don't feel like they have the information that they need to make an informed decision at the ballot box. Can you share if voter education is a part of the programming that you all do? Do you also give new voters the tools that they need to go out and exercise their voices at the ballot box?
Yeah, definitely. I think
Mhm.
that's something that we hear a lot too. It's like, well, I don't really know. I don't really follow politics. I don't really, you know, feel like voting, right? I'm not informed. And the truth is, like, we have to empower these students, because a lot of the times, most of the times, they are informed enough to vote, right? If you have um, you have passions, you have issues that you care about, and the fact is that we have to, especially with young voters and voters that have never voted before, we have to lead with the issues,
Mhm.
and say, I vote because I care about climate change, right? And we could have a direct say in that. But this year, for example, we have a really unique, um, you know, opportunity here in Florida that's been really powerful for us on campus, and with young voters that say that they don't really feel empowered to vote, or they really don't really aren't informed about it. Um, so a lot of it is educating them that we have an extreme abortion ban in our state
Mhm.
right now, and so people are finding out about this, right? Because it went into effect right in May, and so people are finding out about an extreme abortion ban, and we're informing them that there's an extreme abortion ban right now, and that you could actually have a direct say in overturning that and getting rid
Mhm.
of it by voting yes on Amendment 4. And so that's really been a big um, a point for us in educating young voters, is that your vote isn't just going to be deciding, right, the presidency, right? It's actually going to have a direct impact on issues, specifically here in Florida, with Amendment 4, but then also Amendment 3, which would legalize recreational marijuana, um, and really just these amendments really give like perspective to students that like is actually tangible, like politics as like something they can actually affect, because it's a yes or a no, and if we get as many people as 60%, then it'll pass. And it's a very like tangible way for students to be like, well, I guess you're right, my vote is going to count, right? um, and so I think really leading on those issues and the values is how we engage with those students to empower them.
So I think politics can oftentimes feel very heavy. In fact, I opened the top of this program sharing something that's been very heavy on my heart. And I think that folks can sometimes get discouraged by what they hear in the news. Certainly, maybe it sounds discouraging, all these obstacles that the majority party has put up to voting in the state of Florida. But let me ask you, Juan, what is something that's giving you hope right now? And what message would you have for voters, and particularly our young voters, but I guess all voters, who might be feeling discouraged by the process right now?
Yeah, definitely. I think something that's been really encouraging to see is that we've already registered over 1,000 students to vote since the start of the semester, which hasn't been a month yet.
Nice.
And so that is exciting, really exciting for us on the ground and for our fellows. And the volunteer engagement has almost tripled since the summer as well. And so there is hope here in Florida when I see that amount of engagement, especially on our campuses. And really just a lot of the universities that we're at and where the students are at, they have districts that have been decided um, by less than 1,000 votes. And if students, just half the students would go out to vote, they could swing that election. So
Mhm.
imagine if all the students went out to vote, then they would decide their local house race, they would decide their county commission race, right? And then we know that those decisions have way more direct impact of our lives than the higher offices, right? And so really just focusing on that. And then, like I said, again, with Amendment 4 and Amendment 3, we're going to need every single vote, right, to get that 60+1. And so the difference is going to be a couple thousand people. And that means that if your university, right, your friends, your campus, your community goes out to vote, then we're going to win. And remembering that, and I'm seeing, you're seeing I can see it in the polling, I can see it in the work that we're doing. We're going to need every single vote. And if students come out just a little bit more than they have in the past, then we could swing the election 100%.
I really believe that. Congratulations on registering 1,000 new voters this semester alone. How many new voters has People Power for Florida registered overall since you've been doing this work?
Yeah, so we've registered now over 13,000 voters in the last 3 years. So we were founded in 2021. And then this year alone, we're at 3,600 voters registered this year. And our goal is to be at 5,000 this year. And so that's really, that's exciting. That's the work we're doing.
Go on with your bad self. That's what we would say. Go on with your bad self. You're doing it. And this is so encouraging because it also is, slow and steady wins the race. I don't think people understand how difficult voter registration programs are. So as leader of the House Democratic Caucus, we run field programs, partisan field programs, where we are registering new voters, where we are re-enrolling existing voters in vote by mail. And it takes a lot of work and diligence to move the needle even a little bit. And I think in people's minds, it's almost like they expect you just to roll up on a gang of voters who are like, oh yeah, I want to re-enroll and vote by mail, or you just roll up on a gang of students who are like, oh yeah, what I've been meaning to do is register to vote. No, it takes one-on-one conversation. It takes engagement. It takes multiple touches. Sometimes it takes education. Sometimes it is really easy, but it's not always that easy. And that's why it feels like, slow and steady wins the race. It's all about being diligent. It's about making incremental progress. But my goodness, that adds up over time. So congratulations on those awesome numbers. Can you tell us, what role do you think advocacy is going to play in the future as we try to look towards some changes to these bad laws? Like what role will advocacy and policy play in terms of maybe creating a more level playing field as we try to do this voter registration work in Florida?
Yeah, definitely. So I think that a big part of it is going to be, right, like I said, getting people out to vote this year, getting them registered, getting them out to vote this year, but continuing that momentum after the election, because we know right around the corner is that legislative session.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that is going to be on our minds right after the election already. And the fact is that we need to make our voices heard as young people, not only in the ballot box, but in Tallahassee, right? And so I think a big role is going to be showing up and testifying against bad bills and putting pressure on your lawmakers in person and calling them and saying, I'm not going to stand for an abortion ban, right? Because the reality is, when Amendment 4 passes, they have to make laws now in Tallahassee to enforce them, and we know that they're going to try everything to skirt that law, and we have to let them know that we're not going to stand for it, and that our will of the people is going to be heard, right? And so I think definitely remembering that all this energy is great, and that we have to get everyone out to vote and register up until November, but that we got to keep building our movements past November and past elections through the legislative session, and continue that work until 2026, right? 2027, keep on going, because like we said, this is a long-term process, and you can be a change maker, right? If you get your friends more involved, right? If your friends are voting every cycle, right? They're getting them out to vote. Well, how about we encourage them to join you for a canvas or join you for a phone bank, right? Really try to create that change, and that's how we're going to do it. And young people specifically need to be leading the way.
Yeah, just to underscore a couple of really important points that you just made. What you're talking about are implementing bills. and we have seen the majority in the Florida legislature do this before. Consider the previous Amendment 4, where we gave returning citizens, those who had a felony conviction in their past, the right to vote. And Floridians thought that we were just saying, hey, you've done your time. Absolutely, you should be able to vote. And then the Republican majority came back and said, actually, you know what? But what about those fines and fees? And we said, okay, well, then could you at least create a database so people could know how much they owe and get that resolved? And they're like, nope, not our problem, right? Like they find ways to gut the meaning of the constitutional amendments we pass. They did the same thing, by the way, with classroom size. Like they've done this over and over again. So the best insurance policy in terms of making sure that Amendment 3 and Amendment 4 are implemented correctly really is to break the Republican supermajority in the Florida House. It's where we have the best chance to make the best gains so that we can push back against some of this extremism that we've been seeing coming out of Tallahassee. And then the second point that you made was about advocacy. And I will tell you, Juan, that one of the best instances that I can remember in recent history where constituent advocacy made a difference was when the Republicans were contemplating doing away with the Florida Bright Futures program, or they were going to change it dramatically. And honey, let me tell you, young people got on the phones. They were like, you better not touch it. And the next thing you knew, the Republican who mentioned that he might introduce this legislation was like, what bill? I don't know. I didn't have a bill on Bright Futures, you say? It was a complete turnaround, and it was because of public advocacy. So, I'm here to tell you that it works. Well, we have enjoyed our time with you. I want you to tell our audience, are there any upcoming events or anything that people should be aware of if they want to join in with you?
Yeah, definitely. And so something that we're working on right now in this weekend and next weekend is we're hosting youth organizing boot camps with the Yes on 4 campaign on college campuses. And so this weekend on Saturday, we actually have a youth organizing boot camp on campus at UCF focused on Amendment 4 and how you can be a change maker on your campus and be a leader to get your friends out to vote Yes on 4, and how we're going to do that, equipping you with those tools, and also have some guest speakers. So that'll be this Saturday. And then, so if you're in the Central Florida area, it's open to all high school, college, grad students, recent grads in the Orlando area and in the Central Florida area. And then also the weekend after on Saturday, we have our boot camp at FIU. So if you're in the South Florida, in Miami and Broward and Palm Beach, we're going to have on the 28th our Yes on 4 youth organizing boot camp in Miami. And you could find all this information as well on our Instagram, right? It's People Power FLA, and also peoplepowerforflorida.com /bootcamp. And you can see all our boot camps coming up on there. So if you're a student, a young person, a recent grad who's wants to take that next step and join the youth organizing movement around Yes on 4, now's the time to do so.
First of all, you're making me wish I was much younger so I could come and hang out with y'all. Second, yes, for the young people who are watching, but folks, if you're out there and you've got a young person in your life who is feeling fired up about this election, but maybe they don't know where to put their energy, they don't know how to translate this energy and enthusiasm into action, we would encourage you to have them connect with People Power for Florida so they can get engaged with other young people around the state who are fighting for our freedom to be healthy, prosperous, and safe. Juan, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Congratulations on all your success, and we wish you the best. I would say from now until Election Day, but I know you're year-round, so just keep on doing the great work that you're doing.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Leader Driskell, and we'll definitely see you soon.
Thanks. We appreciate it. So I just love being able to bring this kind of information to you all. And tonight we thought it was very important to start spotlighting some folks around the state who are doing incredible work on the ground. We're very grateful to Juan for joining us. And it's so incredible to hear about all the awesome work that People Power for Florida is doing. If you know of someone who's doing great work on the ground or maybe a great organization, feel free to reach out to us and let us know. You can always reach us at yourvoice@finterestforflorida.com. That's yourvoice@finterestforflorida.com. You also probably know that this is the email address that we use to hear from you and to hear your stories. We want to hear from you. Do you have a voter registration story? Have you faced any obstacles to voting? We also led off tonight with September 11 stories. What's your September 11 story? And then we also talked about the tragedy that was unveiled, that was revealed in Georgia when there was the mom who passed away because she couldn't get access to care after an abortion. Do you have an abortion story? Do you know someone who does? We want to hear from you. We want to hear from you about how these policies are impacting you, whether it's the affordability crisis, the inability to find affordable property insurance, whatever it is, and how these policies are impacting you. We want to hear from you, because our theory of the case is that whether you're in the Panhandle or down in the Florida Keys, whether you're Republican, Democrat, or NPA, or maybe some other party affiliation, these policies are impacting us all. And they impact us on a very human level. And they don't really care about your party affiliation. And frankly, here at the Driskell Debrief, neither do we. We care about every Floridian's freedom to be healthy, prosperous, and safe. I know that that is what I fight for. I know that is what my caucus fights for. And I know that's what so many of you are out there working on as we try to move our country forward and turn the page and move us toward a more inclusive future for all of us. So our call to action, make sure that you are registered to vote. Make sure that you talk to your friends and family to ensure that they are registered to vote as well. Please ask them to request their vote by mail ballot if they've not done so already, because we know that, maybe as individuals, it's easy for our voices to go unheard. But when we partner together, when we make our modest individual investments, including voting, I know that we can bring about the positive change that we need in our communities, our state, and in our country. And if you need any of those voter resources, you can go to registertovoteflorida.gov. That's registertovoteflorida.gov, and it'll have all the information that you need. So thanks so much for tuning in. As ever, we appreciate you, and we will see you next week. Take care.